There's a moment in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and it's not when Raskolnikov kills, not when he's caught, but once he starts to unravel, consumed by a sickness that no one else can see. And that sickness is guilt. That sickness of guilt does not scream. Instead, it corrodes. And for Dostoevsky, that quiet erosion is more telling than any punishment society could ever inflict. If you truly want to understand the human soul, watch somebody dealing with guilt. Not the kind of guilt that fades away with time, or the kind of guilt that can be rationalized, the kind that sits in your chest like a weight, the kind that haunts you. Dostoevsky saw guilt not as a flaw to be overcome, but instead as a kind of internal proof that we haven't entirely lost ourselves, a mark that the conscience inside you is still alive. It's raw and it's uncomfortable, but it's also deeply human. Now, I can't speak. Now, we tend to treat guilt as if it's some sort of disease, something that you're supposed to eliminate with therapy or distract away the productivity or get rid of it with antidepressants or even drown it out with noise. But oh my god, I can't pronounce his name. Dostoevsky's lens is different. He doesn't coddle the idea of guilt. Instead, he shows you a man such as Raskolnikov who believes he can bypass morality through intellect, and then he suffers because the world punishes him. Now, we tend to treat guilt as if it's some sort of disease, something that we're supposed to eliminate with therapy, or even distract away with productivity, or drown out with noise, antidepressants, all those kind of things. However, Dostoevsky's lens on that is different. He shows you a man like Raskolnikov who believes that he can bypass morality through intellect, and then suffers not because the world punishes him, but instead because his soul does. And why? Why? Because beneath all of our cleverness and all of our theories and all of our self-justifications, there is a moral compass that doesn't answer to logic. It answers to something older and more primal. And once we betray it, it never forgets. And you will notice, if you read a lot of Dostoevsky, that he rarely ever gives you peace. His characters writhe under that weight of their own decisions. Sonia, who carries a moral clarity despite her suffering. Ivan Karamazov, who cannot accept a world where children suffer without justification. These aren't moral heroes or villains. Instead, they're people so deeply aware of their own contradictions that they crack open under them. And that is the point. Guilt in Dostoevsky's world isn't a detour. It is the road itself. If you feel it, really feel it within you, it means that there is something in you that still cares about right and wrong, even if you cannot articulate it, even if you no longer live by it. The sensation of guilt reveals that you are not fully numb. You haven't dissolved into apathy. You may be lost, but you're not empty. And that is why guilt is still proof of your humanity. Not because it feels good, because it doesn't. Guilt feels like shit. You hate it feeling guilty. But because it implies a kind of inner witness within you. Someone is still watching inside you, even when the world isn't. Someone remembers what you said. Someone remembers what you did and what you failed to do. And that memory is burned into your mind, not to punish you, but again, to remind you that you are capable of more. Now, this is uncomfortable, obviously. It goes against the modern ethos of immediate self-forgiveness. We are told that guilt is fairly unproductive, that it doesn't serve us for anything, that it should be replaced with self-compassion or moving on or therapy. And yes, there may be wisdom within that. Guilt can become pathological and it can be manipulated, but it can also be weaponized and misplaced. But what Dostoevsky offers is a warning against discarding it from your life too quickly. Because guilt, when it's real, comes from a place of moral tension. It's a tension that implies a moral awareness within your life. Without guilt, we risk becoming too easy upon ourselves. We become clever monsters, able to justify absolutely anything without any sort of narrative. But guilt is the process which interrupts that. It asks you, did you live according to your own ideals? Or did you betray something sacred? And if so, if you've done any of these things, what are you going to do about it? This is why in plenty of Dostoevsky's novels, guilt is often the beginning of redemption. Not the end. It doesn't make you weak or anything. It just positions you for a kind of clarity. It positions you for a reckoning. You see, Raskolnikov's redemption doesn't start once he confesses. Instead, it begins the second that he can no longer sleep. It begins that moment that his guilt starts to fracture his pride. That fracture is the soul clawing its way back into the light. And that process isn't clean. There is no 5-step plan. There is no, methodology to follow. It is chaotic, it's confusing, it's wild, it's raw, and it's painful. But it forces you to acknowledge a version of yourself that failed. And it forces you to not hate it, but instead to confront it. To say, yes, I did this, and I'm not running anymore, and I confront this, but how do I become better? These are the kind of people that, Dostoevsky respects. This is the kind of courage that he respects. Not the moral purity of saints, but instead the brutal honesty of the guilty who refuse to lie to themselves anymore. People who are willing to live within the weight of their mistakes, not as martyrs, but instead as realists. As human beings who recognize that conscience isn't something you choose, instead it chooses you. And it doesn't give a shit about your excuses. And that is what makes Dostoevsky's novels so timeless. He never flattens the reader. He never writes for applause. He writes with a scalpel, peeling back the layers of human rationalization to expose that raw nerve underneath. And then he asks, now that you see it, what are you actually going to do to fix that? And maybe that's where this conversation actually lands. Maybe, if you are feeling guilt, not shame for who you are, but guilt for what you've done and what you failed to do, sit with it. Don't rush to silence it or clear it from your mind. Instead, listen to it for once, Maybe realize what it's pointing towards, what truth you're trying to bury, or what standards you abandoned, and why. Because if you genuinely listen carefully, that guilt may no longer become your enemy. It might instead be your conscience calling back to you a version of yourself that you lost somewhere along the way. And that calling is a privilege, and that privilege means that you have never completely given up. You still believe there is something worth returning to. Guilt at its core is a moral compass malfunctioning within time. Not because it's broken, not because it's malfunctioning or anything. Wait, I said malfunctioning twice, whatever. But because it's trying to correct course. Of course it will sting, it will haunt you, and it'll be painful, but it also guides you, and it also, it heals you to an extent. That sting is simply just a sting of life. Dostoevsky understood this idea. He didn't offer any easy answers, but instead he gave you something better. He gave you a mirror to reflect upon yourself with. And if you dare to ever look into that mirror, without flinching, without running away, without hiding from it for once, you might just see the weight of what you've done. But not just that, you might also see the strange redemptive potential of what you might still become. Sorry, I kind of bottled that ending. So I do recommend you read a lot of Dostoevsky. His books are quite long and tedious. However, they are beautiful as well. So thank you for watching this video. That's about it. Crime and Punishment, very popular, very good one. Popular for a reason. I like that one. I think The Brothers, no, that's someone else. Whatever. Bye.